Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the fertile banks of ancient Egypt, where farmers did not rely on seed drills or modern canals, but on the rhythm of the mighty Nile. Forget the grand temples and golden tombs of pharaohs. The real story is about mud, sweat, and the gamble of every planting season on the river's rise and fall. So tonight, we ask what it really took to survive the annual inundation. What did it feel like to watch your fields vanish beneath floodwaters, then reappear rich with silt? Every era had its own challenge, so let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always amazing to see who's joining this journey along the riverbanks. Now dim the lights, pull your blanket close, and let's wade into the Nile together. You wake before dawn to a faint tremor in the air and a distant murmur that grows like the call of many voices. You step from your reed hut into cool morning light and find the horizon aglow with ripples of bronze and silver. The Nile has begun its annual rise. You hurry down the sandy path toward the riverbank, where your fellow villagers already gather. Each face is lit with awe and hope. You feel the humid breath of the desert soften as the floodwaters inch ashore, carrying the promise of new life. You dip your toes into the murky current and taste the fine silt on your lips. Behind you, the fields of parched earth stretch pale and cracked. The sun has baked the clay until it resembles broken pottery. But now the river's flow spills over its banks to flood every hollow. The edge of the water laps at your sandals, leaving a ribbon of soft mud. You bend to scoop a handful and let it squish between your fingers. Black gold, you call it. Women stride into the shallow water carrying clay pots. They fill each vessel and haul it back to their homes. The water will be used for cooking and bathing until the flood recedes. But its true gift is the layer of fertile ooze left behind on every field. You know that when the water withdraws, it will leave a blanket of rich soil where you can plant your grain. You leave the river's edge and climb the small ridge that overlooks your farmland. You watch as the flood spreads across low plains, drowning the stubborn thistles and brittle stalks of last year's crop. Young men stand waist deep in water, wielding long wooden poles to guide the current into newly carved canals. Their work is urgent and skilled. They know that every hour of delay means less silt on dry land. A priest emerges from a small shrine of mud brick beside the ridge. He holds in his hands a bowl of lotus blossoms and fresh bread. You bow your head as he steps down into the water. He scatters petals across the surface and dips bread in the flood to honor Hapi, the river god. You close your eyes and murmur your own prayer, asking for steady rains in the distant hills where the waters begin. As the sun climbs higher, the flood gathers speed. Small fish tumble from hidden pools and dart through the rising tide. Children squeal with delight as they chase the flopping silver shapes. They scoop handfuls of fish that will be dried and salted for winter. You watch them with a smile, remembering how you once ran barefoot and unafraid. Today you stand taller, bound to the river's ebb and flow. Along the water's edge, the workers plant rice, shoots in standing water. They bend low over the muddy surface and push each seedling into the soft ground. Their backs curve and their faces glisten with sweat even in the gentle breeze. You join them for a moment, pressing a shoot into the ooze. Your muscles protest, but your spirit soars. This is the magic of the Nile. By midday, the flood has reached the date palms that ring your village. Their trunks stand proud above the current. A few builders begin to repair the low mud walls around each plot. They pack clay to raise the edge slightly above the waterline. Soon these walls will hold back the flood long enough for the canals to fill. You offer your help with a wooden bucket of mud. The workers nod in thanks, and you brace your shoulders as you pile earth onto the ridge. As afternoon light softens, you wander back to the riverbank. The water now covers every field beyond sight. Small islands of green mark the few mounds where grain stores were saved. You point them out to travelers who pause to marvel. You tell them this is the miracle that feeds the empire. Without the Nile's annual embrace, the sands would swallow every crop. You return home to gather your family for the ritual of Thanksgiving. In your courtyard, you spread mats of papyrus and set out bowls of lentils and barley cakes. You light incense of myrrh and cedar. Your children stand wide-eyed as you speak of the river's journey from distant mountains to these plains. You break the bread and pour sweet beer from clay jugs. You taste the first fruits of the flood in every bite. Evening falls, and lanterns glow beneath woven palm fronds. You sit with your kin and guests from nearby farms. You share stories of floods past that were too low or too high. You remember years when the river barely crept onto the fields and famine followed. Tonight you feast on hope and gratitude. As stars emerge above the river's ribbon, you step back to gaze at the flood under moonlight. The water shimmers like molten glass and carries the promise of another harvest. You feel the pulse of the land and the rhythm of centuries. Ancient farmers walked this same muddy edge, trusting the Nile to awaken their fields. You close your eyes and listen to its slow song. You rise at dawn tomorrow to guide the waters into every furrow. You will sow seeds in the black mud and tend them with care. You will reap in autumn under a blazing sun. You will share bread and beer once more. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not wake to the river's call and shape your life to its ever-changing flow. In that embrace lies survival and the fierce joy of living between desert and flood. You rise with the sun and return to the flooded fields before the heat of the day grows too strong. The canals you helped carve yesterday now brim with water that spills into every furrow. You wade in ankle-deep mud and press your wooden marker into the soft earth to measure the water level. You note where the current flows too swiftly and where it pools too deeply. Farmers pass you in a silent procession, each carrying a simple tool to clear debris from the canal mouths. You lend your shoulder to push aside clumps of reeds that would block the flow. Once the main channels run smoothly, you climb a small embankment to inspect the network of secondary ditches. You step carefully across the raised ridges that divide each planting basin. In one basin, the water has receded too quickly, and the mud has begun to crack. You kneel and press your fingertips into the clay. You cup water in your palms from a nearby canal and pour it over the dry patch until the mud softens once more. You pat the edges to seal the cracks and restore the basin's walls. Farmers work in synchronized lines, planting rows of emmer wheat that will grow through the moist soil. You join them for a time, patting each seed into place and covering it gently with silt. The work is slow and requires careful attention to spacing so that each stalk has room to reach toward the sky. You feel the soil cling to your trousers and taste the earthy tang on your tongue when you wipe sweat from your brow. Yet you know that this labor is the true source of life for your village. When the midday sun climbs overhead, you withdraw to the shade of the date palms. You carry a gourd of water that you sip sparingly. The air is thick and warm like a soft blanket pressing on your skin. You rest your arms on your knees and watch the floodwater gleam in the fields below. You imagine the green shoots that will emerge in a week or two and fill the valley with waving blades. You taste the promise of the harvest before it has begun. In the shadows of the palm grove, you find the village elder seated on a stone bench. He is older than any man you have known, and his eyes shine with memories of floods that were too small or too large. He recounts how once the inundation failed and the people fled in search of pasture and water. But today the fields are full, and the granaries hold the last year's overflow. You listen in respect and add your own story of the narrow canal that you helped redirect to save a neighbor's plot from ruin. By afternoon, you return to the riverbank, where children have built small dams of stones and clay to create shallow pools for fish to breed. They laugh as water spills through their barriers and frees the fish back into the main channel. You gather handfuls of tiny fry and slip them into a woven basket. Later, you will carry these fingerlings to a flooded side channel, where they can grow until they are large enough to feed your family. The river sustains you in more ways than one. As the light softens, you begin the ritual of checking the village's water wheels. These simple machines lift water from the river into narrower channels that run through the heart of the settlement. You climb onto the wheel and tighten a wooden handle to reset broken paddles. The leather straps that bind the axle have loosened with the weight of the flood. You press a fresh piece of hide into place and bind it with twine soaked in tree resin. When you turn the handle, the wheel creaks to life, and water splashes over the lip into the courtyard channels. With the water wheels restored, you return to the fields one last time to free the young date palms planted on the ridge above the floodplain. You lean into the soft soil and lift each sapling by its base. Water flows from its roots in a thin stream. You carry it to a slightly higher bank where the ground is drier and the roots can search for air. You pat the earth firmly around each trunk to anchor it against the flood's rising tide. You whisper blessings to the trees that will bear fruit in the years to come. Evening brings a cool breeze that ripples the surface of the flood like silver threads. You walk the riverbank to join your neighbors in a simple feast of barley cakes and fresh fish roasted on embers. You spread mats of woven papyrus beneath the stars and pass around clay bowls of spiced lentil stew. You dip your bread into the broth and taste salt and cumin on your tongue. You laugh at stories of the day's work and offer thanks to the river gods who have carried life to your village once again. By the time the moon rises, you step back to watch the flood reflect its pale light across the fields. You think of the weeks ahead when the water will slowly drain and the green shoots will emerge. You imagine the harvest in autumn when the wheat will sway like golden waves. You feel the rhythm of the Nile in your bones and in your spirit. You know that you would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not rise to measure the water, tend the canals, plant the grain, and feast beside your kin in the light of the moon. In that cycle of flood and field, you find a strength that endures through every season. You rise before dawn into a world, stirring with promise and uncertainty. The air is cool and dry on your face as you step onto the rooftop of the granary tower. From here you can see the ribbon of the Nile winding through golden fields and distant hills rimmed with violet dawn light. Yet beyond those low rises lie the Ethiopian highlands, where the monsoon clouds gather to feed your river each year. Today you will read the sky and earth to learn whether the rains have begun. You place your hands on the rough stone balustrade and gaze toward the southeast. At the horizon, a faint haze drifts like smoke from distant fires. You recall the elders' words that a thin grey line on the horizon means that rain is coming to the mountains. You lean forward and shade your eyes with your hand. The haze thickens to a sheet of cloud layered above the hills. You feel a flutter of hope deep in your chest. Below you, the village stirs. Farmers lead their oxen toward the fields to begin repairs on the basins that will hold the floodwaters. Women stride to the well to draw buckets of fresh water. Children twist reeds into simple baskets for gathering date fruit. You lower your hand and call out a blessing in the old tongue that honors Happy and Khnum, who sculpt the flood in distant lands. You speak with the certainty of one who has learned to trust in signs both subtle and grand. A herald arrives at your side bearing a clay tablet inscribed with reports sent by river traders who have just returned from the Red Sea coast. They tell of storms at sea and winds that have pushed ships back for days. You read each stroke of the stylus in your mind. Strong winds off the Ethiopian plateau have forced caravans to wait. That means the rains have begun there too. You let a smile tingle on your lips and send word to the canal guards to prepare for an early inundation. You descend the narrow spiral stairs into the courtyard where the village scribe kneels on a reed mat. He holds a wooden stylus poised above wax. You hand him the tablet and watch as he presses each symbol into the soft surface. He pauses at each sign to confirm the meaning, and then continues without haste. You stand behind him and feel the warming glow of success. Soon the flood will arrive to renew the land. The sun climbs higher, and you join the elders beneath the date palms for a council of weather watchers. Each elder wears a cloak of linen dyed with indigo that marks them as keepers of the river's secrets. They sit on a woven mat in a circle, each holding a reed horn and a simple wooden staff. You bring a bowl of water to the center of the circle. You dip your hand into the cool liquid and sprinkle it on the earth to honor the waters to come. The eldest watcher closes his eyes and breathes deeply. He stretches his arms wide as if to embrace the entire land. He recites the ancient chant that calls the clouds to climb the mountains and unleash their bounty. The words rise and fall like the river itself. You join in the chorus with a steady voice that you learned as a child. You feel the air tremble as if the world listens. After the chant, the watchers stand and face each cardinal direction. They raise their staffs and tap the ground 3 times to summon the 4 winds. Each tap echoes in the quiet courtyard. You close your eyes and feel the breeze shift against your skin. A breeze from the southeast carries the scent of wet earth and ginger lilies. You nod, certain that the monsoon rains have begun their journey. A young apprentice waves his arms toward the sky and points out a small wisp of cloud drifting westward. He calls out that the rains will reach the inner desert highlands by the end of the week. You smile and place a gentle hand on his shoulder. You remember your own first lessons as an apprentice, when every cloud became a promise and every breeze a sign. You pat his shoulder in pride and send him to relay news to every village from the delta to the first cataract. By midday, you travel by boat along the canal to inspect the floodgates. Each floodgate is a simple wooden sluice that can open to admit water or close to hold it back. You guide the boat under banners of linen that flutter in the breeze. You step onto the bank and wade into knee-deep water. You grasp the crossbar of the sluice and push it aside with your body weight. The floodgate groans and the water rushes in to fill the channel. You feel the current strengthen beneath your skin. You pull the gate fully open and let the water surge through. You pause on the bank and watch the floodwaters racing through the field channels. They swirl around each planting basin, carrying fresh mud and tiny fish. You smile as you recall the days before you learned to guide the waters. You once feared the inundation would drown the crops entirely. Now you trust in the balance of earth and water. As the afternoon sun shades the sky, you return to the granary tower. You climb the stairs once more and stand at the balustrade. You gaze at the fields, where the flood now stretches like a mirror to the sky. You see reflections of date palms and reed huts dancing in the current. You feel a profound peace at the sight of life returning to the land. In the twilight, you join your family around a small hearth beneath your hut. You break bread with fresh fish and lentil stew. You recount the day's blessings and the signs of abundance to those who have spent the day tending to the fields. Children squeal with delight at the promise of fish roasted on embers tomorrow. You bless each bowl and cup with a prayer of thanks. As night falls, you step outside into a sky thick with stars. You look toward the southeast where the monsoon clouds began their journey. You feel gratitude for the rains that will sustain your people. You press your palm to your heart and vow to honor the river with every breath you take. You know that the monsoon is a gift you could never create on your own. You kneel on the riverbank and trace the shape of the floodplain in the sand. You whisper your hopes for a bountiful harvest and for the safety of those who work the fields. You press your forehead to the sand and listen to the soft lullaby of water against earth. You rise with a gentle sigh and feel the land steady beneath your feet. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not read the skies, walk the mud, guide the floodwaters, and trust in the partnership of earth and river. In the gathering clouds, you see the promise of life renewed. You close your eyes and let the memory of their journey fill your dreams. You awake before first light with the taste of damp air on your tongue. The sky is still dark, but the eastern horizon glows faintly. You hurry from your hut to check the western sky for cloud banks gathering in the low hills. Your heart beats with hope because every sign of moisture in the far hills means life for your fields. You walk the sandy track toward the old watchtower where the elders stand on duty. Their robes of white linen whisper in the breeze as they peer toward the skyline. You join them without a word. You raise a hand to shade your eyes and look for gray bands rising above the distant shoulder of the hills. Already the thin mist has gathered into low cloud, the color of silver fish scales. You press your palm to the cool stone of the tower wall and whisper thanks to Khnum, who shapes the flood. A young acolyte climbs the narrow-rung ladder to the tower roof and rings a small bronze bell. The clear peal echoes across the flat plain and reaches the ears of farmers rising for work. They pause with their hoes and adzes to lift their faces to the sky. They know that the gathering clouds herald the season of renewal. Below you the scribe kneels with soft animal hide spread on a wooden board. He makes quick marks in charcoal to record the time rain was first signaled in the hills and the speed of its advance. These observations will guide planting schedules for every village along the river. You lean over and trace his strokes, confirming the record. Knowledge of the rain's timing can mean the difference between abundant harvest and desperate famine. You wake before sunrise and step into the floodplain where yesterday's waters have left a layer of rich black mud. The air is cool and damp as you pull your linen skirt up above your ankles. Your bare feet sink into the soft earth and you feel the mud slip between your toes. You carry a wooden hoe over your shoulder and a leather pouch of emmer wheat kernels at your waist. Today, you will plant the grain that will feed your family and sustain the village for another year. You kneel at the edge of the first basin and press the hoe into the mud. With careful strokes, you cut shallow furrows in straight lines that stretch toward the horizon. Each furrow is only a few inches deep, but must be even to ensure all kernels meet the silt at the same level. You work slowly, drawing the blade toward you, then stepping forward to repeat the motion. The mud parts easily under the tool and closes behind the groove like a living creature. When the first furrow is complete, you scoop a handful of emmer kernels from your pouch. You count the grains by sight, aiming for one seed every 2 inches. You drop each kernel into the furrow and adjust its position with a fingertip. The mud is cool and velvety against your skin. You press each seed into the earth with the heel of your hand so that it nests securely in the damp silt. Across the field, other farmers move in concert, carving furrows and sowing seeds. You see a group of women bending low with metal sickles in hand, cutting rushes to mark the ends of each row. Their skirts trail in the mud, and their voices rise in song to lift the tedious task. You hum along, matching your breathing to the rhythm of the hoe and the placement of each kernel. After you sow one row, you rise and shake the mud from your knees. You wipe your hands on your woolen sash. You step back and survey the rows you have planted. The dark lines contrast sharply with the lighter ridges between them. You feel a surge of pride in the straightness of your work. When the floodwaters return, they will fill each furrow and cover the seeds with a thin layer of silt, protecting them from birds and ensuring even moisture as they sprout. You move on to the next furrow, repeating the same process. You drop a single kernel, press it down, then step to the next position. The silt clings to your hands and rubs the skin raw. You pause to rinse your hands in a small pool of water beside the canal. The water feels cold against your palms. You cup it and splash your face, tasting the earth in every droplet. You return to planting with renewed energy. Mid-morning sun climbs higher, and the swampy air grows heavy. You can smell the sweet notes of lotus blossoms drifting from the riverbank. You pause under a small tamarisk tree to catch your breath. You sip water from a clay flask and snack on dried figs. The sweetness fuels you for the work ahead. You wipe sweat from your brow and tie back your hair with a strip of cloth so that no stray locks fall into your furrows. You return to the field and join a neighbor who struggles to guide oxen through the silt. The team pulls a wooden plow fitted with a metal blade that cuts deeper furrows. You watch as the oxen strain against the load, their flanks slick with water. When the plow comes free of a clod, you step in to smooth the soil with the hoe. You adjust the depth of the furrow and then take your place with the emmer seeds, sowing into the newly opened earth. As midday approaches, you pause again to rest under a reed shelter. You sit on a woven mat and break bread with lentil stew. You share the meal with fellow workers and exchange news of the flood's progress. You speak of nights lit by lanterns as you tended the floodgates and days spent hauling mud for canal banks. You laugh at a story of a boy who nearly sank to his waist in a hidden pool. The laughter eases your fatigue and sets your shoulders straight once more. After the meal, you return to the planting until the horizon of furrows stretches as far as your eye can see. You work side by side with friends and family, each kernel a promise of the harvest to come. You feel a bond to the earth beneath your hands and to the river that shaped its richness. You press the last seeds into the final furrow and pat the soil smooth with both hands. As the sun dips low, you walk between the ridges to inspect your work. You press your heel into the earth to check that the seeds are covered but not too deeply buried. You clear any pushback of mud from the ridges so that water will flow freely. You lean on your hoe and watch as the wind stirs the tall grasses at the field's edge. You imagine those grasses carried by the flood, their seeds scattered to new ground. That evening you meet the elders by the canal to offer thanks. You wade into the water as they do, pouring fresh beer into the flow as an offering to Hapi. You speak words of gratitude for the flood that will cover your seeds and bring them to life. You taste the bitter honey and barley on your lips and know that your labors this day will feed the souls of your people. When you return home, the mud has dried to sticky clumps on your sandals. You wash your hands and arms in a basin of fresh water and let the chill soothe your skin. You sit by the fire as twilight falls and watch the coals glow red. You break a small loaf of bread and sip sweet beer while the children listen to stories of planting and flood. You feel the ache in your back and the firmness in your heart. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not rise before dawn to turn black mud into fertile ground, sowing kernels of emmer wheat by hand. You would not know the rhythm of earth and water, the scent of silt after the flood, or the taste of hope in each seed. In this work lies the lifeblood of your world. You pause at midday to rest beneath the shade of a single acacia tree that stands sentinel at the edge of the field. The heat of the sun warms the black silt at your feet, even through your sandals. You pick a handful of mud and squeeze it through your fingers, marveling at how the grains cling together like fine leather. Each ridge of earth you have prepared holds the promise of life for the kernels buried within. A neighbor brings out a woven mat and spreads it on a high knoll above the furrows. They ladle lentil stew into clay bowls and tear chunks from a loaf of coarse bread. You each eat in silence at first, savoring the warmth in your bellies. Then conversation springs up about the progress of the planting. Someone recalls the year the floods came late and the crop failed. Others speak of a season when the inundation was so high that kitchen gardens were lost beneath the water. You nod and sip water from a gourd flask, letting the cool liquid slide down your throat. After the meal, you return to the field. The air shimmers as the sun beats down, turning the silt's surface slick and muddy. You gather the remaining kernels of emmer in your pouch and weigh them with a quick count. Only a few remain, enough to finish the last plots near the canal edge. You kneel at the boundary and begin once more. Your hands move almost by memory now. You cut a narrow trench, drop a kernel every few inches, and press the mud down with your fingertips. You work steadily, one eye on the distant horizon for any sign of returning floodwaters. Children run between the rows carrying bundles of young reeds. They use the reeds to mark the ends of each furrow so that irrigation channels can be reconnected when the waters rise. You lift a bundle and weave the reeds into a low barrier at the field's edge. The woven fence will slow the flow of water just enough to fill each basin without washing away the fresh seeds. You tuck the final reed into place and step back to admire the neat pattern of ridges, furrows, and markers. Nearby, a group of women crouches by a temporary compost heap. They spread a thin layer of manure and straw on a nearby plot reserved for fallow planting of legumes. You join them, scooping the dark mix onto your hands and scattering it over the soil. The manure will enrich the earth and help the grains of emmer grow strong roots. You rub the mix into the topsoil, watching as the pale straw darkens beneath your touch. As the afternoon heat eases you, and your neighbors begin the task of watering the fields, you open a small floodgate by the canal and let the water pour into the furrows. You guide the flow with a flat piece of wood to ensure each ridge fills evenly. The water glides through the channels and spreads across the basins. You watch the silt swirl and settle, burying the kernels beneath a thin blanket of rich mud. You close the gate when the water reaches the tops of the ridges. The field breathes with relief and readiness. A sudden breeze stirs the date palms lining the canal bank. You pause in your work and lift your face to the air. You taste the hint of rain carried from the distant hills. You know that the monsoon has begun in earnest. The buzz of cicadas rises around you, and the sky takes on a faint silver glow beyond the palm fronds. You smile and feel the weight of your labor's ease. The river will soon renew the fields again this evening and carry more life to the silt. Before the light fades, you walk the length of the planted area to clear any debris that clogs the channels. You wade through shallow water and push aside fallen leaves and broken stalks. You kneel to scoop mud from the bottom of the canal where it has built up. Each scoop you take helps water flow more smoothly when the next flood arrives. You work with quiet concentration, aware that any blockage could starve the seedlings of moisture. As dusk approaches, the workers gather their tools and return to the riverbank. You join them in laying out mats beneath the thatch shelters. You share a final bowl of lentil stew and dip barley cakes in the rich broth. You laugh at a story about a goat that escaped into a neighbor's field during planting and devoured half a furrow of seed. You promise that next year you will build a stronger fence. After the meal, you step away from the shelter to stand by the canal's edge. The sun sinks low, and the sky turns amber and rose. You feel the pulse of the river slow as the water level peaks at the end of its journey. You slip off your sandals and let your feet rest in the cool floodwater. You lean against the wooden gate as it sighs under its own weight. You close your eyes and listen to the gentle lap of water against the mud banks. In that moment, you feel the connection between yourself and the earth around you. The silt that covers the field beneath your feet will soon sprout into green shoots of emmer. The work of today will become bread and beer for your family and for countless others. You taste the promise of life in the still water and the soft mud. As the last light fades, you return to your hut, where a small lamp waits beside your sleeping child. You wash the mud from your hands and face in a basin of clear water. You feel the ache in your back from kneeling and planting all day. Yet you also feel a deep joy at what you have sown. You wrap your arms around your child and whisper words of hope for the future. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not rise before dawn to plant in the silt, count every seed, guide the waters, enrich the soil, and rest beside the flood's gentle lullaby. In that cycle of planting and flooding lies the heartbeat of your world. You close your eyes and drift to sleep beneath the promise of tomorrow's harvest. You wake before dawn and join your fellow villagers at the edge of the floodplain where yesterday's waters have begun to recede. The air is crisp and carries the scent of wet earth. In the half-light, you see long mounds of clay that mark the planned lines of canals. Today, you will transform these earthen ridges into living waterways that will carry the Nile's flood to every field and basin in the village. You shoulder a wooden shovel with an iron blade and step into the damp silt. The mud gives beneath your weight like soft leather. You press the shovel into the ground and lift, drawing up a clump of dark clay. You place it beside the ridge to deepen the trench. Your shoulders burn with effort as you repeat the stroke. You work steadily, matching the pace of others in your team so that the trench forms a straight line. Each spadeful of earth brings you closer to the water's path. A young apprentice runs ahead, following the marked guides with a rope of palm fiber. He holds one end while the overseer holds the other, ensuring the canal will flow on a slight incline toward the fields. You step in behind them once the ridge is cut and smooth the base of the canal with a hoe. You level the earth, removing lumps that would slow the current. You take care that the slope is even so that water will neither rush too fast nor stall before reaching the furthest basins. As the sun rises higher, the labor intensifies. The shovels cut deeper into the silt and the canal grows in size. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow and drink from a gourd of fresh water. The cool liquid tastes of clay and river. You sip slowly and let your muscles relax for a moment before returning to the trench. Across the field, another crew carries baskets of broken pottery and stones. They drop these into the newly dug trench to form a rough lining that will prevent erosion when the water flows. You help them guide the baskets and lift the stones, settling each into the canal bottom. The pottery shards click beneath your hands as you press them into the clay lining. You work with care, knowing that a single collapse could flood the wrong field or destroy the embankment entirely. By midday, the main artery of the canal is complete. Water from the river's edge now pours into the entry point. You stand at the sluice gate and draw a deep breath. A neighbor calls to you and lifts the wooden bar that holds back the current. With a crack, the floodwaters burst into the canal, swirling around the stones and rushing toward the distant basins. You cheer as the water surges, tasting fresh silt in the spray. You steady yourself against the gateposts and watch the canal begin its life. While the water runs, you turn to the task of building basins. These are low-walled enclosures that will hold water long enough for the fields within to soak the mud. You and your team dig small trenches that circle each planting plot. You cut a narrow channel 3 feet wide and a foot deep. The spoil is piled between trenches to form the basin walls. Each basin must be level so that water covers every inch of the plot evenly. You use an adze to carve the walls smooth and remove loose clods. You pack the clay firmly with your boot heels so that the walls hold fast under the weight of the flood. You stamp down each ridge until it stands firm. You pass to the next basin and repeat the process. The work is hot and backbreaking, but you know that without these walls, the water would rush through without leaving moisture in the soil. As afternoon approaches, you inspect the network of canals and basins. You walk along the embankments feeling for any soft spots. You prod the walls with a pointed stick and listen for hollow echoes that warn of collapse. You mark weak sections with a piece of red cloth. Later, you and a repair crew will return to reinforce those walls with fresh clay. A sudden gust of wind stirs the palm fronds overhead. Dust and silt swirl across the fields. You pause and lift your face to the breeze. A crack of thunder follows, sounding distant and promising. You glance toward the southeast, where the monsoon clouds have been gathering for days. The sky has darkened slightly, and you sense that rain may soon fall on the highlands to feed your canals and basins once more. You take a moment to rest and share bread and lentil stew with your friends beneath a makeshift shade of woven reeds. You laugh at a tale of a neighbor whose ox broke free and dug its hoof into a fresh canal, draining water prematurely. You promise to help him mend the breach when the flood slows. You sip sweet beer and let the warmth spread through your chest. Refreshed, you return to the repair of the weakest basin walls. You carry baskets of new mud and pack it firmly into the cracks. You pat the clay with your palms and smooth it with a flat stone. Each patch you fix strengthens the field against the coming flood. By the time the sun dips low, you stand atop a low ridge and watch the water fill every trench and surround every basin. The network you carve today will guide the floodwaters across the plain with the precision of veins in a leaf. Each field will soak up the rich black silt that brings fertility to the grain. Your hands ache and your back groans, but you feel pride in what you have accomplished. You wiped sweat from your brow, yet you also brought life to the earth. As evening falls, you gather the tools and return them to the village storehouse. You wash your shovel and hoe in a small pool beside the canal and lean the handles against the wall. You step back and admire the work by lantern light. The water glows softly in the basins. The walls rise like dark sentinels against the flat earth. You walk home along the canal bank, passing fields still moist from today's labor. In your hand you carry a small handful of freshly turned silt. You press it to your face and breathe deeply. You taste dust and life in equal measure. You remember the long hours of digging and packing and lining. You remember the calluses on your palms and the ache in your arms. And you know that you would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not bear the back-breaking work of carving canals and building basins. At your hut, you gather your family by the hearth. You share a simple meal of bread, baked in the new pottery shards you used earlier today. You break bowls of stew by lantern light. You recount the day's progress, the canal running strong, the basins sealed, the fields ready to drink the flood. You feel the tired warmth of community as your children listen wide-eyed to the tale of muddy trenches and rising waters. You lie on your mat that night with a full belly and a quiet heart. You feel the earth's pulse beneath you. You know that tomorrow you will rise before dawn to tend the flood again. But for tonight, you rest in the knowledge that your labor has shaped the land itself. You close your eyes and drift to sleep as the floodwaters whisper through the basins, carrying life to every furrow you have cut with your own hands. The next dawn finds you back at the canal entry, where water has settled into a steady pulse. The main trench you carved must now be widened to allow enough flow for the upper fields. You join a crew of masons who carry baskets of stones and clay mortar. They stand knee-deep in water and fit each rock into the muddy bank to shore up the sides. You press smaller stones into gaps and smooth mortar over rough edges. Each stone locks against the next as the wall rises toward the sunlit sky. Once the stone lining is secure, you move down the canal to inspect the wooden gates that regulate the flow. The gate is a simple plank mounted on pivot posts. You lift the plank with 2 helpers and slide it along a notch cut into the timber frame. You test the seal by pouring a bucket of water between posts. A few thin streams leak through. You mark the spots and carve small wedges of reed to fill the gaps. You press mud over the reed to seal the joint. When you test again, the water holds back in the main channel. Only a slow kernel of flow seeps through the frame as intended. While the gate holds, you set a team to clearing vegetation from the canal banks. Reeds and rushes have sprung up in the nutrient-rich mud. They would catch debris and block the water's course. You hand out long wooden rakes and guide each worker to scrape the roots away. The clumps float on the surface and are dragged to the embankment where they dry in the sun. You gather the dried reeds into bundles. Later, they will be woven into mats to line the basin walls against erosion. By midday, the canal flows smoothly between stone walls. You turn your attention to the smaller feeder ditches that lead to each basin. These must be carefully aligned to ensure even distribution. You use a simple water level made from a length of reed tied across a bit of leather. When the water rests level in each end of the reed, you know your slope is correct. You mark the direction of flow and dig small trenches that carry water just below the surface. You cover the top with a thin layer of mud so that only a hint of shimmer reveals the water's path. Farmers will lift small clumps of earth to channel water where they need it most. In the afternoon, you host a gathering of field captains and labor overseers. They stand around the central tub of water that holds the water level tool. You show them how to measure the slope and adjust the feeder trenches. You demonstrate how to patch leaks in the basin walls with a mixture of clay and chopped straw. The overseers kneel in the mud to practice each technique. You watch them for each misstep. You offer gentle corrections and praise successful repairs. They bow in gratitude. This training will allow them to maintain the canal network when you are away or when rains intensify. As the sun lowers toward the western horizon, you travel along the banks to open the floodgates for the last time today. The water has pooled higher than expected. You call for caution. You instruct 2 guards to stand at each gate and control the flow with long poles. When you give the signal, they push aside the beams that hold back the tidal rush. Water pours through and surges down the canal with steady power. You follow the channel on foot, guiding the water at each fork, urging it to fill the basins in distant fields. On the far ridge you pause and watch the fields transform before your eyes. Each basin fills like a small mirror to the sky. The ridges stand firm in their sculpted curves. In places you see glimmers of green, where the first shoots of emmer peak above the silt. You smile and raise your arms in blessing. You have shaped the river's will to feed the land. You feel the pulse of every spade toiling in the mud and every stone placed in the walls. By evening, the canal gates are secured and the fields glow under the setting sun. You return to village by candlelight. You carry a small jar of oil to repair the hinges of the sluice gates before dawn. On the way, you pause by the granary tower. You climb the ladder and look out over the flat plain. In the dusk, the flooded fields appear as bands of glass reflecting torchlight. You trace the course of every canal and basin with your eyes, and feel the deep breath of the earth in response. When you descend the tower, you are greeted by children eager to hear of your day's work. You kneel and tell them of stones placed to hold back water and trenches carved to guide the flood. You speak of the tools that measure slope and the patience needed to patch walls. They listen with rapt attention and ask to help the next time you repair the gates. You promise them a lesson soon. Back at home, you wash the day's mud from your hands and dress in a shift of soft linen. You sit by the hearth and share a bowl of lentil stew sweetened with dates. You spread fresh bread broken from a newly baked loaf. You laugh with your family as you recount the small triumphs of the day. You feel the ache in your arms and the warmth in your heart. As the final embers fade, you kneel at the small chapel by your door. You place your hands on the carved stone of the altar and whisper thanks to Khnum, Hapi, and Osiris for guiding your labor. You pray for the strength to maintain the canal network through the coming weeks of flood and planting. You rise to walk to your mat and stretch your stiff limbs. You close your eyes and drift to sleep under the lullaby of the river's current and the promise of a golden harvest. You rise before the sun has reached its peak and step into the field of ripened grain. The stalks stand waist-high, bending slightly under the weight of full heads of emmer wheat. A faint breeze stirs the golden sea and brings the scent of sun-warmed chaff. Already the air feels heavy and hot. You tighten the leather belt at your waist, reach for the sickle hanging at your side, and step forward to begin the harvest. With each swing of the half-moon blade, you cut through a dozen stalks at once. The metal tip glints in the sunlight as you slice cleanly through the tough stems. You let the bundle fall gently to the earth and move on, repeating the motion until your rhythm steadies. Sweat beads on your brow and trickles down the back of your neck. Your shirt of coarse linen clings damply to your skin. You do not pause to wipe the salt from your cheek. There is work to be done. A neighbor stands beside you doing the same work. You nod in greeting and share a brief word of encouragement before returning to your own row. Together you move through the field, drawing a swath of cut grain behind you. In the empty space left in each pass, you see the red clay earth peeking through. You think of how this wheat will feed your family and fill the granaries for the months ahead. After a time, you bend to gather a small bundle of stalks. You tie the stems with a length of braided reed, lined with straw. Your fingers grasp the tough strand and draw it tight. You pat the bundle at the cut-off end, making it neat and compact. Then you stand it upright in a ring of other sheaves that mark the edge of the field. Soon a circle of bundles will form, standing like golden sentries against the sun. The sun climbs higher. Each stroke of your arm feels heavier than the last. You pause to breathe and reach for your water gourd. You lift it to your lips and feel the cool liquid rush across your tongue. You close your eyes for a moment and let the water soothe the ache in your shoulders. When you open them again, you see more stalks to cut. Close by, a group of women works in the shade of a low stone wall. They bring cloth sacks and fill them with sheaves carried down from the field. A child stands nearby, clutching a small sickle too large for his hand. He watches as a woman lifts a sheaf and wields the blade with practiced skill. You smile and wave before stooping once more to cut a fresh row. In the far corner, a man operates a threshing sled. He drags a panel of wood studded with stones over a raft of standing grain. The stones crush the stalks and free the kernels. The men guide the sled in straight lines, their boots sliding in the golden chaff. Each pass sends dust into the air. They rake the scattered grain into piles that will be winnowed later. You glance toward them and feel the promise of the harvest's first reward. By midday, the sun stands high and the field seems to shimmer. You can taste heat on your lips and feel the sweat burn your eyes. Yet every swing of the sickle brings rippling bundles closer to the yard. You step out of the row for a moment and stretch your arms over your head. Your back cracks loud enough for you to hear. You rest the blade on your shoulder and gaze across the tilled earth at the stacks of sheaves growing like small hills. You return to work until the entire plot is cut. The swaths of empty earth form a pattern of light and shadow beneath the blazing sky. You steady your breathing and wipe a sleeve across your forehead to clear your vision. You take one last handful of tall grain and slice it free. You let the stalks fall into the gathering of bundles. A bell tolls from the village temple. You know the midday meal awaits. You stand and lower your sickle to the ground. The metal blade rests on the cut stems, a silent companion. You lift your arms above your head and stretch again. You feel the ache in every muscle, the culmination of morning's toil. You gather the nearest bundles and carry them toward the stacking area. Each load holds 3 or 4 sheaves. You lift with your knees, feeling the weight settle into your shoulders. You walk across the field, placing bundles one atop another in neat triangular stacks. With each placement, the stack grows taller, a monument to your labor. When you reach the end of the field, you stand back and admire the golden pyramids rising from the earth. Their broad bases shimmer like waves. You feel a surge of pride at what you have created. You rest for a moment with your back against a stack, leaning on the cool stalks. You close your eyes and rest your head against the sun-warmed grain. The sound of conversation drifts from the threshing ground. You hear laughter and the creak of sled runners cutting across the field. You hear the rattle of kernels and the soft hiss of stalks as they slide beneath the panel. You imagine how soon the grain will be winnowed in the breeze, the light chaff carried away so that you may store the heavy kernels. A child runs past you, clutching an armful of baby wheat stalks. He races toward his mother, who waits by a pile of sheaves. She smiles and gathers him in her arms. You watch the scene with a smile of your own. It reminds you that tomorrow's bread begins today in the sun-drenched field. You wipe your hands on your skirt and head toward the village. You carry one final bundle under your arm and wave to the men working the sled. You feel the weight of the bundle against your side and the sweat trickling down your neck. Yet you feel also the fierce joy of a harvest begun. At the edge of the field you pause and look back at the golden swath. You think of the many days of planting and waiting that led to this moment. You think of the sweat and sore muscles and the prayers for steady rains. You think of the family gathered tonight by hearthlight to break bread made from this very harvest. You step into the path and carry your bundle toward home. You know that tomorrow the work will begin again, stacking, threshing, winnowing, and storing. Yet today belongs to the sickle and the sun, to the flicker of gold beneath a blistering sky. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not face the midday sun, the burn of steel on stem, and the call of the field that must be answered at every dawn. In that answering lies the heart of your world. By the next dawn, the field of golden stubble lies neat and bare beneath the pale sky. You return with a yoke of oxen and wooden sled that will carry the sheaves to the threshing floor. You hitch the oxen one each side of the sled and guide them into position beside the first stack. You hook the bindings of the sled to the oxen's yoke and urge them forward with a soft word. The sled glides until it rests against the lowest tier of bundles. You and a neighbor lift sheaves onto the sled in even layers, taking care that no head of grain is crushed beneath the weight. When the load is full, you guide the oxen along the narrow track back to the threshing area. The sled's runners creak in protest, but bear the burden without faltering. You pause at the platform and lift the first sheaf from the sled, tossing it before a team of workers who prepare the cereal grains. At the heart of the threshing floor, a circle of men stands ready. Each holds a flail made from a length of wood capped with a heavy knot. You place a sheaf on the sun-baked stone and raise your flail high. You bring it down with all your strength. The grain husks crack beneath the blows and the kernels spill onto the floor. You stir the broken stalks with your foot to expose the remaining heads. With rhythmic motion, you beat each bundle until only chaff and stalk fragments remain. Some fields in other villages use oxen to trample the sheaves instead of flails. Today, you follow the older custom of manual threshing. You admire the precision of the workers who rhythmically strike each sheaf until it yields its precious contents. Their arms move in harmony, a dance of grain and wood that has fed this land for countless generations. When the threshing is done, you draw a square of cloth beneath a low breeze that carries away the chaff. Together with other women, you rake the mixture into loose heaps. Then, you lift the cloth by its corners and toss the grain into the air. The lighter chaff rises on the wind and drifts away. The heavier kernels fall back onto the cloth. You repeat this winnowing until only clean grain remains. By midday, the sun stands overhead, and each breath feels warm and sweet with the scent of new wheat. You measure the volume of grain in leather sacks and divide it between family stores and the communal granary. Your share will feed your household through the coming year and supply the seeds for the next planting. The rest is set aside for the village reserve, and for tithes owed to the temple and local governor. A group of scribes arrives with clay tablets and reeds. They record the quantities levied in exchange for the right to till this soil. You kneel before them and present your sacks. They weigh each on a simple balance scale. With each measure, they ink symbols into the clay. When the record is complete, they seal the tablet and place it in the governor's archive. You watch as the officials ride off with their collection, knowing that without this tribute, the canals and granaries could not be maintained. In the cool of the afternoon, you help your family carry a portion of clean grain to the storage pit. You climb wooden steps into the top of a walled silo. You tip the sack and hear the dry cascade of kernels filling the cell. You smooth the surface with a paddle to firm the mass and protect it from pests. You seal the opening with woven reeds and clay plaster. The grain will rest here until the lean months when every morsel counts. As the day wanes, you join the harvest feast. Mats of woven papyrus are spread beneath a squat fig tree beside the granary. A pot of fresh fish stew simmers on a stand. Loaves of barley bread are broken into generous wedges. Bowls of lentils and fava beans warm your belly. You taste the fruit of today's labor, savoring each flavor against the memory of the day's toil. Children chase each other between stacks of grain sacks, their laughter bright against the crackle of drying chaff. An elder recounts a tale of a single sheaf that lifted the spirits of an entire village when the floods failed. You smile at the story's ending, that no matter how meager the harvest, the shared labor and shared feast bind your people to the land and to one another. When the sun sets, you walk the length of the threshing floor by lamplight. You pick up a single kernel of wheat and hold it between fingers. You press it to your lips and taste the sweetness of promise. You recall the months of labor, planting in the silt, carving canals, building basins, and cutting the stalks. Each step led to this moment of grain and gratitude. You return home to sit by the hearth and grind grain for tomorrow's bread. With a stone mortar and pestle, you crush the kernels into coarse flour. The rhythm of the grinding is soothing, a reminder that life depends on small tasks done well. You inhale the scent of fresh flour and recall the taste of warm bread straight from the fire. Before you sleep, you kneel at the roadside shrine to offer thanks to Happy, the river god, and to Osiris, the lord of the harvest. You place a handful of grain on the altar and whisper a blessing for the fields to come. You touch the smooth stone and feel the strength of generations in the carved surface. You return to your mat and close your eyes to the soft murmur of the river carried on a night wind. You know that when dawn breaks, the village will begin anew, planting, carving, digging, reaping. You know the cycle that binds you to the land and to life itself. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not bend beneath the sickle, thresh beneath the sun, and give thanks before the fields once more. In the heartbeat of grain and river lies your world. You rise before the sun has fully cleared the horizon, carrying leather sacks heavy with the first fruits of your harvest. Each sack holds 2 measures of emmer grain that you and your family have threshed and winnowed in recent days. You shoulder the burden and walk the narrow path toward the village granary, where clay silos stand like silent sentinels. The air is cool, but the promise of the day's heat rides on the wind. Today you will ensure that the grain is stored for winter and pay the tithe owed to the governor's steward. At the granary courtyard, the master of stores greets you. He wears a linen robe trimmed with indigo thread to signify his office. He holds a tally board carved from palm wood and inscribed with rows of tally marks. You kneel before him and offer 2 sacks of grain. He nods and swings a large pan balance into view. You place 1 sack on each side of the scale beam. His assistant drops bronze weights into the central dish until the beam rests level. The measure is exact. The master calls out the count, and his assistant marks the tally board with a slender reed stylus. You step aside and carry your sacks toward the nearest silo. The clay walls are smooth and cool. Each silo is a tall cylinder built of mud bricks sealed with plaster. A narrow doorway leads inside to a hollow chamber that will protect the grain from moisture and vermin. You lift the first sack onto your shoulder and climb wooden steps built around the silo's base. A trapdoor in the floor of the upper level opens to reveal the dark space below. You tip the sack and hear the cascade of golden kernels as they fall into the silo. The sound is soft and hollow like rain on a clay roof. You let every kernel slide free until the sack is empty. You fold the empty bag and set it aside. Then you seal the trapdoor with a thick plug of clay mixed with straw from last season's harvest. The plaster will hold the door fast until spring, when you reopen the silo to mill the grain into flour. At ground level, the next farmer is already loading another pair of sacks. You descend the steps and wipe sweat from your brow. The sun has climbed higher, and the courtyard is bright with light. You carry your tools into the shade of a palm that stands beside the granary. There you rest for a moment before returning to fetch more grain. Around you, the village hums with activity. Women sweep the storeroom floor to clear away chaff. Men carry baskets of small fish that will be dried in the sun and stored alongside the grain for the lean months. By mid-morning, the master of stores calls for the tribute to be weighed. You gather with other farmers before a long table of clay jars and small baskets containing barley, oil, and fresh eggs. These are offerings to the governor in exchange for his protection and the right to till the land. The steward appears clutching a scroll of parchment. He reads aloud the decree from the palace. Each family must pay 1/10 of its grain, 1 measure of oil, and 2 eggs for every 6 family members. The decree also demands a contribution of woven mats and dates. You step forward and place a basket of oil on the scale. The steward marks the quantity on his scroll. Then you bring an egg and wrap it in fresh papyrus leaves before laying it in a small basket. Next, you kneel and offer a sheaf of woven mats made by your wife from the reeds harvested last week. Each item is recorded by the steward's assistant in neat columns of cuneiform signs. You hear the scratch of reed stylus on clay as the record takes shape. When your offerings are complete, you bow your head in respect. You watch as the steward nods in approval and hands the scroll to his scribe. The scribe claps the wet clay tablet with another to imprint his own record. Then he places both tablets in a wooden box that will travel to the governor's treasury in the provincial city. The governor's tax collector will verify the records before issuing your family's official receipt. With tribute paid, you return home to share a bowl of fish stew with your children. They listen wide-eyed as you describe the enormity of storing the grain and the ritual of paying tribute. You speak of the master of stores who watches over every measure of grain, and the governor's steward, whose seal guarantees the peace of the land. You see pride in their faces that even small farmers can fulfill such duties. In the afternoon, you help repair the storehouse roof, where loose thatch allowed rain to drip onto the stored grain last season. You climb a ladder with fresh bundles of palm fronds and tie them in place with strips of palm fiber. Each layer overlaps the one below to shed water away from the clay walls. You work steadily, knowing that secure storage will keep your grain safe until you return in the harsh months of winter. As the sun nears the horizon, you collect the last empty sacks and carry them to your hut. You stack them with care for future use when the next harvest arrives. You feel the cut marks on your hands where the sacks rubbed against your skin. You feel the ache in your shoulders from lifting heavy loads. Yet you feel also a sense of accomplishment. You have secured the life of your family through months of toil and safeguarded the village's stores. Before dusk, you walk to the local shrine of Osiris to offer a handful of grain. The priest stands ready with a clay bowl. You pour the kernels into it and bow your head in prayer. You ask for Osiris's blessing on the grain below and for the governor to continue his fair rule over these lands. You taste dust and devotion on your lips as you step back and watch the priest burn incense. At your hut, you break bread with fresh flour made from the older grain that remained after tribute. You toast your family's health and the fertility of the fields. You tell them that this year the tribute was heavier than last year, but the harvest was richer too. You promise that with careful storage and faithful offerings, the cycle of planting and paying tribute will continue to sustain your people. When night falls, you lie beneath a sky thick with stars. You think of the clay silos rising like sentinels in the moonlight, and of the officials who will carry the record of your tribute to distant courts. You feel the earth's pulse beneath you, and know that the grain you stored will become tomorrow's bread and tomorrow's seed. You know that to be an ancient Egyptian farmer is to hunger for the harvest, and to share its bounty with the rulers who guard the riverine promise. You close your eyes and drift into sleep, the weight of grain and tribute resting in your bones like a promise of renewal. By late morning, your family's official receipt has been sealed, and you head back to the granary to oversee the distribution of the tribute grain to the governor's agents. The sun rides high above the courtyard, turning the packed earth pale gold. You lift your eyes to the clay towers where the silos stand like sentries. Each trapdoor bears a token of sealed clay stamped with the local governor's emblem. These seals keep the tribute grain secure until it is counted and measured by the provincial officials. You climb the wooden steps to the platform that circles the main silo. A small group of scribes waits there with clay tablets and reed styluses. They compare the tally marks recording today's delivery with the tally marks inside the sealed trapdoor. You hand them the wooden board with your own record. They inspect each mark, then whisper among themselves. Finally, they nod and press the board into soft clay to confirm the distribution record. You step aside and let them replace it in the governor's archive. Below you, the tribute grain is drawn from the silo into large clay jars and woven baskets. You watch as two men dip wooden scoops into the storehouse and pour measured portions into each vessel. They level the top with a flat board so that every container holds the same volume. A third man counts the jars and baskets on his fingers and calls out the total. The steward's assistant repeats the count on his tablet. Each vessel is then sealed with a clay lid stamped with the official seal. One of the steward's aides hands you a sealed jar to sign off on. You take a reed stylus and press your personal mark into the clay. It is your guarantee that the grain was delivered in good measure. The steward himself examines the seal and nods his approval. He places the vessel among the others, destined for the governor's caravan. Soon these jars will line the governor's own granaries in the provincial city. With the tribute safely bound, you turn to the task of storing your family's remaining grain. The master of stores calls you to the smaller silo that you reserved for household use. He uncovers the trapdoor and steps aside while you tip 2 sacks of grain into the chamber. You fill the silo 3/4 full, leaving space for air circulation. Then, you seal the opening with molded clay and straw, and press the governor's seal into the center to prevent any tampering by midnight thieves. You step back and admire the neat surface. Next, you escort a small group of men to the Temple of Grain where the priests receive their portion. The temple stands on a raised platform beside the granary. Its walls are painted with scenes of Osiris and the fields of life. Inside the inner sanctuary, you kneel before the altar and offer 4 measures of grain in a shallow basin. The high priest kneels beside you and waves a bundle of incense over the offering. The smoke curls upward in golden tendrils as he recites the ancient words. You bow your head in silent prayer for the continued blessing of the land. After the temple distribution, you visit the storehouse of the village council. Here, the elders have reserved a stockpile to lend to families in need or in times of drought. You and the elder women pour 5 measures of grain into a coarse linen sack. They tie it with a strip of leather and inscribe the family names on a clay token. This way, when a household borrows grain, the council can track its return. You nod to the elders and promise to return the labor owed in the fields once the flood recedes. By afternoon, you gather with your neighbors under the shade of the palm grove to discuss the calendar of deliveries. The master scribe lays out a reed mat inscribed with the months of the year. He points to the symbols marking the planting season, the inundation, the harvest, and the festival of thank offerings. Each family must contribute a portion of its stored grain at those appointed times. You listen closely and memorize the schedule. This calendar will guide your work and your giving for the year ahead. At the day's end, you return to your own field to check the small storage pits you dug for personal seed reserves. These pits are lined with clay and sealed with thatch mats, pressed down beneath heavy stones. You lift the mat and peer into the pit. The kernels within are dry and plump. You measure out 3 measures for your next planting cycle and repack the remainder carefully. You seal the pit and pat the stones smooth. Then you tie a length of red cloth to a nearby stake as a marker so no one accidentally disturbs the seed store. When the evening bells call the workers to rest, you join the communal feast at the granary courtyard. Mats of woven grass cover the ground and clay bowls of soup and porridge await each family. You sit beside the master of stores and taste rich stew of lentils, onions, and date syrup. You dip fresh loaves of barley bread into honeyed broth. You share laughter with friends who tilled the fields and paid the tribute with you today. As darkness falls, you walk home under a sky thick with stars. You pass by the silos whose sealed gates mark the fortune of the harvest. In the night breeze, you hear the rustle of stored grain against the clay walls. You know that within those towers, the village's life has been secured for moons to come. Back at your hut, you kneel before the small shrine by your door. You place a single measure of grain in a clay bowl and whisper your gratitude to Osiris and Khnum. You ask for the strength to tend next season's crops and the wisdom to fulfill your duties of storage and tribute. You rise and step onto your mat, the cool earth beneath you, a reminder of the toil that sustains your world. You slip into sleep with the promise of the grain cycle complete. You have stored your family's harvest, paid your tribute, supplied the temple, lent to neighbors, and recorded the calendar of needs and offerings. You carried heavy sacks, sealed clay jars, and etched symbols into tablets. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not shoulder this burden of grain and governance. In the hushed night, you dream of silver sails on the flood and golden fields rising beneath the sun. You return from the fields with shoulders aching and clothes streaked with mud. The sun leans toward the west, and the air smells of earth and ripening grain. You spot your family's mud brick hut clustered among others in the village center. Smoke rises from cooking fires and laughter drifts on the breeze. You know that tonight you will share bread and beer with kin and neighbors and feel the bonds that hold your community together. Inside the hut, your mother stands before a low hearth where a large clay pot simmers. She stirs a thick porridge of lentils and onions, seasoned with cumin and coriander. Your younger siblings sit on a reed mat watching the pot bubble. Their eyes widen when they glimpse you entering with a new sack of grain. You smile and drop the sack at the doorway, its soft rumble, a promise of tomorrow's bread. Your father steps from behind a wooden post, carrying a large loaf of flatbread, still warm from the fire. He pats the smooth surface and hands you a piece. The bread is dense and hearty, made from the finest flour milled from last season's harvest. You break off a chunk and let it soak up the stew's rich broth. Your teeth sink into the soft crumb, and you taste sweetness from the barley and the sting of cumin on your tongue. A neighbor arrives carrying a woven basket of dates and figs. She smiles warmly and sets the basket down in the center of the mat. You pass a handful of fruit around the circle. Each piece is sticky with syrup and glimmers beneath the fading light. Children reach for the largest figs while elders debate which gods to thank at tomorrow's temple offering. Your older sister pours beer from a clay jug into small cups carved from gourds. The beer is cloudy and thick with grain particles. Its scent is sour and sweet. You lift your cup and press your lips to the rim. The first mouthful warms your belly with barley's tang and hints of honey. You pass the jug around so every hand, rough from harvest work, can feel its smooth curve. Outside the hut, other families gather by their doorways. Smoke from countless fires drifts in lazy curls overhead. You step out with your emptied cup and call to a friend who returns the greeting. He holds a plate of roasted chickpeas mixed with crushed sesame. You swap a handful and crunch each warm bite with relish. The chickpeas are crisp and nutty and pair well with the beer's tang. An elder approaches with a tambourine carved from a tortoise shell. He taps a gentle rhythm and children clap in time. A young man lifts a reed flute to his lips and blows a slow melody that echoes among the huts. The music rises and falls like the river's flow. You feel the rhythm in your chest and tap your foot to the beat as you move back inside to help clear dishes. Your mother hands you a clay basin of water scented with rose petals. You dip your hands into the cool liquid and lift the basin so each family member can wash away the sweat and silt of the day. You rub soap made from animal fat and wood ash across your skin. You pass the basin on until every hand is clean and every spirit refreshed. By torchlight, you gather at the table one last time for blessings. You stand and place your hands on the baked clay tabletop. You close your eyes and whisper thanks to the gods for the harvest and for the bonds of family and community. You ask for health and for the flood to come each year. Your family echoes the prayer in a soft chorus. When the meal ends, you help your father sweep the hearth and stack the clay bowls and cups. You tuck blankets and mats beneath the eaves so that those who wish to sleep under the stars can lie safe from dew. Children chase each other in playful circles before tiring and nestling beside their parents on the mats. You step outside alone to look at the sky. The stars wheel above the palms that fringe the village. The moon casts a silver glow on the mud brick walls and the shattered fields beyond. You breathe deep and feel the bonds that join you to this place and to these people. In the laughter of neighbors and the shared taste of bread and beer, you find strength to rise before dawn again. Tomorrow you will return to the fields to guide the floodwaters, to sow seed, and to harvest grain. But tonight you rest in the warmth of family and community. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not share your labor and your bounty with kin and neighbor. In the simple act of breaking bread together, you forge the bonds that sustain your world. You awake before first light to the distant toll of temple bells calling the faithful to honor the river's god. You dress quickly in a clean linen tunic and knot a broad cloth sash at your waist. You carry a small basket of offerings heaped with freshly baked bread and a flask of sweet beer brewed from emmer grain. On your way to the riverbank, you pause at the Shrine of Hapi, where a painted statue stands beneath a canopy of papyrus fronds. Its stout body is crowned with bundles of lotus blossoms. You bow your head and let the soft chill of dawn brush against your skin. At the shrine, the high priest awaits you. He wears a robe of deep blue, dyed with indigo, and a collar of faience beads that glint in the candle glow. He extends his arms in welcome, then leads you through the low doorway into the inner sanctuary. Inside, the walls are painted with scenes of the inundation in vibrant ochre and green. You trace the arches of papyrus reeds and the sweep of water carrying fish and silt. The priest lights a bundle of incense. Its sweet smoke curls toward the painted sky overhead as he intones the ancient prayer of offering. You step forward and place the bread on a carved stone altar. The loaves are soft and golden from yesterday's baking. You lift your head and speak your heart's need for steady floods that will clot the fields with fertile mud. you press your palm to the cool stone and offer a silent vow to share the bounty with those in need. Next, you pour the beer into a shallow dish. The liquid glistens like sunlight on water. You bow again as the priest sprinkles drops across the altar to wet the statue's feet. The sound of liquid on stone echoes like a promise of renewal. Outside the shrine, a procession gathers in the pale light. Men bearing vessels of water, the color of blood, stand beside women carrying bunches of fresh green vegetables and bowls of figs. Children follow with baskets of round cakes sweetened with honey and bits of date. You join the line and step onto the floodplain where the grass is still slick with dew. The river's edge gleams across the sandbars as the water moves slowly toward the huts and fields beyond. A chorus of voices rises in chant as the priest leads the way. You follow behind him and offer your basket of offerings as you pass. Each person lays their gift on a long woven cloth spread on the ground. The bread and beer, the water and produce will all be shared later as a feast of thanksgiving. For now they lie in neat rows beneath the watchful figure of the god whose image stands upon a low dais. The priest raises his arms and the chanting swells into a hymn of praise. His voice is strong and resonant. You close your eyes and let the syllables of the ancient words fill your heart. Each phrase calls upon Happy to swell the river at the coming season, to bring the flood that will feed the land and sustain the people. The sound rises and falls in gentle waves beneath the rising sun. When the chant ends, the priest steps aside and motions for the water-bearers to move forward. They carry tall jars of river water and pour them at the base of the statue. The water spreads across the stone dais and drips down onto the offering cloth below. You glimpse the bread absorb the water and the beer foam at the edges. You bend to touch a loaf and taste the dampened crumb. Its sweetness is mellowed by the river's gift. Next, the women approach with their bowls of vegetables and fruits. They lay their bowls before the statue and step back respectfully. You see a ripe fig glisten in the morning light. The priest picks it up and places it on the altar of stone beside the offerings. He then sprinkles grain from a small pouch over the vegetables and fruits as a final blessing of abundance. With the ritual complete, you step forward with your own offering of water drawn last night from the first flow of flood. You pour it onto the altar and feel a thrill as the liquid vanishes into the soft earth below. The priest raises his voice in final thanks and stamps his foot to echo the heartbeat of the land. The chorus repeats his final words in a low refrain. Silence follows. The dancers step into the circle. Their feet are bare and their voices ring clear as they whirl around the statue of Hapi. They carry sistrums of metal that jingle like small bells. You tap your foot and sway with the rhythm. The dancing is slow at first, then quickens with each step. You let the beat drive you forward until you too are part of the living pulse that celebrates the river's life-giving power. As the sun climbs higher, you leave the circle and walk along the riverbank. The water laps at your sandaled feet. You raise your arms and breathe deeply. You taste the incense on your tongue and feel the warmth of bread and beer still in your belly. You recall every word of the prayer and every note of the hymn. You know that in a few weeks the flood will reach its peak and the land will drink deeply of the silt. You return to the fields where the first shoots of emmer begin to peek above the mud. You kneel at the edge of a basin and press your fingers into the soft soil. You whisper the names of your ancestors who tilled this earth before you. You ask Hapi to honor their memory with abundant grain. You stand and let the gentle current wash over your hands as a final blessing. Before the day ends, you gather your family for a simple feast beneath a grove of palms. You share loaves and beer from this morning's offerings. You break bread with kin and neighbors and recount the ceremony by the shrine. You speak of the statue's feet that drank water and of the dancers whose joy echoed across the fields. Your children laugh as they taste the sweet bread and lean close when you describe the river god's mighty power. In the fading light, you walk back to the shrine for one last offering. You carry a small clay lamp filled with oil. You light the wick and place it at the statue's feet. The flicker of flame casts dancing shadows on the painted walls. You bow your head and whisper, "Thanks for the day's blessings and for the promise of the flood to come." You step away from the shrine and lean against the cool wall. You feel the gentle thrum of the river beneath the earth. You close your eyes and imagine the waters rising, filling every canal and basin. You feel the pulse of life in every drop. You know that you would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not honor Hapi with bread, beer, and prayers, trusting in the river's cycle of death and rebirth to sustain your world. You wake one morning to a horizon that is empty of green. The fields lie parched and cracked beneath a relentless sun. The great river that once spilled life across these plains has shrunk to a muddy trickle far below its banks. You step from your hut into a world of bone-dry clay and brittle stalks of millet that never reached their full height. Today you face drought and hunger in a land built for abundance. Over the next days, the water does not return. You and your neighbors carry watering skins to the shallow pools that remain in the flood channels. You scoop the muddy liquid into clay jars and share what you can. Children's hands shake as they drink because even this water tastes sour. You lean into each gulp, tasting dust and decay on your tongue. Without steady water, the grain reserves begin to dwindle. You open a sealed silo and scoop a handful of kernels into your palm. You grind some into coarse flour to bake the last flatbreads. You ration each loaf with your family, so that none go hungry. You share scraps with a neighbor's children who cry for food. You know that to refuse them would be unthinkable, even when your own belly gnaws with emptiness. Then the locusts arrive. A black cloud rises on the horizon and moves like a great bird of prey. You hear the distant roar of their wings and feel the tremor of their passing. In moments, the air is filled with chittering limbs and snapping jaws. You and your family run into the fields, waving cloth banners to scare them off. But the locusts have come to feast. They devour every leaf and seed head in a matter of hours. You watch in horror as your carefully planted shoots vanish beneath their ravenous swarm. You stand in the dust and let the wind carry the broken stalks across the plain. You taste the loss in your mind like acid. You fall to your knees and gather handfuls of crushed green matter. You crush it between your fingers and smell decay. The world feels smaller now, stripped of every gift.
Tonight we draw back the string on medieval archers, a brotherhood sworn to wood and sinew whose skill could turn the tide of castles and battles alike. This story isn't just about blood and mud. It's about the relentless training that forged steady arms, the hush before the volley, and the quiet victories when an arrow found its mark. Imagine dawn breaking over a misty field, the weight of your longbow in calloused hands and the taste of dawn air laced with horse sweat and hope. From the rhythmic chant of foot soldiers to the tension of drawn string, you'll see how a single arrow could decide the fate of kingdoms. We're asking what it would actually feel like to survive just one day as an archer in the Middle Ages. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always amazing to see who joins the ranks.
You march toward the quarry in single file. The earth beneath your sandals is soft from last night's dew, but soon gives way to sharp gravel. Torches line the route so that none lose their way in the pre-dawn gloom. You pass rows of stacked clay jars holding water drawn from the canal. A cup is thrust into your hand. You drink deeply, though your stomach still aches with empty hunger. Tomorrow you will raid the cook tent for a crust of bread if you can. Today you must endure. At the quarry you find towering faces of rock that rise against the sky. Teams of stonecutters stand at the base, pressing long wooden wedges into cracks in the limestone. You take up your club and hammer each wedge until it splits the stone. With a low groan, the slab breaks free. Other laborers slip ropes beneath the fresh block and fashion a harness. You grip the rope with white knuckles and prepare to haul. The overseer's whip cracks through the air at the first stumble. You feel its sting on your back and leap forward with renewed effort. The ropes bit into your palms as you pull with every muscle. Your feet slip in the gravel, but you do not stop. You march backward step by straining step until the block skids onto a wooden sled. You collapse on one knee, gasping for breath. Your neighbor pushes the sled up a ramp tilted toward the village wall. You lean into the stone and shove with your shoulder. Sweat drips from the rim of your heavy hair and runs into your eyes. You blink it clear and brace again. The sled moves inch by inch until it reaches level ground. Men outstretch their arms to guide it around the corner. You follow the sled along narrow lanes between mud brick huts. Women and children stand behind low walls to let you pass. You see fear in their faces, for the overseer punishes any who dawdle. You feel their hopeful eyes on your back, praying you will survive the day and bring the block safely to its place. At the temple site, you see towering walls, half-built from the morning's labor. Ramps of earth lead to the top, where masons wait with chisels and hammers. You help load the block onto a scaffold. One end lifts high above your head, and you guide it into place. You brace your back against the face of the wall as it settles into the mortar. The overseer circles behind you, his whip cracking if you falter. You step back to catch your breath. Your shoulders ache as though you carried the weight of the desert sun itself. You rub the sweat from your brow and blink at the blocks that now form an unbroken line from east to west. The temple will be complete only when every block is lifted into position. Today, you have placed one more stone in the city of the gods. Midday sun blazes overhead. You stagger down from the scaffold and find a small heap of barley cakes on a coarse cloth. You break the cakes and swallow the crumbs without pausing. The bread is stale and hard, but you taste only nourishment. You pass the remainder to those behind you in the line of laborers. There is no bread left for idle hands. In the shade of a low wall, you refill your gourd at a washer's trough. Children dip their hands in the water before you rise again. Each child's face tells you more of your duty than the overseer's whip ever could. You turn toward the open field where the blocks await their passage from one ramp to the next. The overseer sounds a shout and you seize a rope once more. You pull until your arms tremble. The block moves, and another man guides it forward with a chain. You follow, and sweat drips from your nose onto the soft soil. Each drop of sweat feels like a promise you cannot break. As afternoon wanes, you help raise the final block for the day. The masons carve the stone's face to match the others already set. You stand behind them and feel the dust cloud your lungs with each chisel strike. You cough, but do not retreat. The temple wall stands taller, as though carved from a mountain. You know it will catch the first light of dawn like a mirror to the gods. When the overseer dismisses the labor, you collapse beside the packed earth ramp. Your back hums with relief at the momentary rest. You sit and stare at the great wall that bears your sweat in every crack. You taste dust and metal in your mouth. You feel bone-deep fatigue that only a night on a thin mat can ease. That evening at dusk, you join your family in the courtyard. Your mother scoops thin porridge into a clay bowl. You grasp it with hands that still tremble from labor. You eat slowly, tasting every grain, as though the world depends on this single meal. You pass the bowl to your younger brother so that he too may have strength. Your father kneels beside you and places a hand on your shoulder. No words are needed. He knows the shape of day's labor carved into your frame. You rise to join the others in a short prayer to the gods of stone and land. You whisper a vow to return tomorrow and carry another block beneath the overseer's watchful eye. You know that without your strength, the temple walls would not climb toward the sky. Yet you also know that this forced work binds you to the land and to the service of power beyond your own. Night comes, and the torches along the temple walls flicker like silent sentinels. You lie on your mat beneath the open sky. You feel the gentle wind stir your hair. You think of the quarry slabs waiting in the morning light. You think of the whip that cracks like thunder and the feel of rough rope against tender flesh. You close your eyes and dream of freed hands and fields of green. You dream of bread that does not crack your teeth and water that flows freely from the canal. You dream of rest that does not come in broken pieces beneath the unbroken gaze of the overseer. Yet when dawn arrives, you will rise again and join the line that moves between mountain-faced walls and living dawn. You will carry stone because this land commands it. You will haul each block because the temple must stand. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer under corvée labor if you could not bear the whip without breaking your will. You will endure because your body and spirit are all you have to shape the world into the image of your gods. The dawn air carries a tense hush as you join your fellow farmers beside the Great Canal. Rumors have spread through the villages that this season's tribute demands will double again. The drought and the plague have already stripped your families of most grain and forced you into harsh labor. Today, a handful of voices has risen against the overseers and the governor's tax collectors. You feel your heart pound with both fear and resolve. You step forward with a neighbor who bears a carved staff as a symbol of leadership. We cast aside our tools of planting and harvesting and grasp sticks and stones instead. Together we stand in a ragged line as the first tax collector approaches atop his horse. His fine robes gleam in the rising sun. The men turn aside the horse's head, and the women press between us to support our cause. You lift your voice to call out that we will no longer surrender our last grain or our bodies to forced labor. Behind you, a child wails for bread, and a mother clutches her empty water jar. You remember your own family's thin porridge last night, and the bitter taste of borrowed seed still in the jar. You swallow hard to steady your voice, and tell the collector that his governor has sealed away our stores until all our grain is gone. You demand fair rates that leave our families with enough to survive. The horse shifts beneath the collector, and his expression flickers with surprise. He raises a hand as though to strike, but his whip falls idle. At that moment, more of our neighbors emerge from the huts with tools turned into weapons of necessity. Some carry wooden clubs once used for threshing, others wield shovels with the metal blade raised above their heads. We encircle the collector and his guards. Our fear gives way to determination. The cry of revolt rings above the canal like a shout of freedom. The taxmen retreat up the bank to the main road, where they regroup with mounted soldiers. You feel panic rise in your chest as the click of armor approaches, yet you stand firm. Beside you, a farmer whose house burned in last year's famine lifts his staff and cries that we have nothing left to lose. He points to the empty granaries and the fields scorched by locusts. The soldiers hesitate as they see the faces of men and women hardened by hunger. In that moment, an elder among us steps forward. He speaks in a clear voice that carries across the water. He reminds soldiers that they too are sons of farmers and share our thirst and hunger. He calls on them to lay down their spears and join our struggle for fair treatment. A murmur runs through the ranks of soldiers. Some fling their shields aside and stand with us. Others lower their lances, but remain on watch for orders. Seeing this shift, the governor's emissaries plead for calm. They promise to lower the tribute and to send seed to the fields when the canal floods again. They offer to register our names so that no family will pay more than its share. You feel relief flood your body like water returning to dry land. Yet you also understand that this agreement is only as strong as our unity. You agree to lay down your makeshift arms once the pledge is sealed in writing. A scribe appears with a parchment and a reed pen. We line up and sign our names with muddy fingers. Each signature marks our defiance and demands justice. The emissaries swear on the names of the gods to honor the compact. We watch them press their seals of clay beside our marks. When the deed is done, we feel the first stir of hope in many moons. That afternoon, you return to the fields under watchful eyes. The soldiers who sided with us stand guard at the entrances, so that no one may seize our grain again. You watch them carry water to those still too weak to fetch it themselves. You glimpse the tax collector trudging back to the governor's palace on foot. His fine robes are stained by mud and sweat. He glances toward the granary wall that you now guard with your life. His head hangs low, In the days that follow, the promised seed arrives from the granary in the provincial city. Clay jars of grain and baskets of beans are distributed to every village. Women and children line up at dawn to receive their portion. You help carry jars to the huts of the elderly and the sick. You share your own ration with a neighbor whose hut was destroyed by fire. Each act of giving binds us closer together. When the waters rise again and carry the flood to our fields, you stand at the new embankments with the same neighbor who stood beside you on the day of revolt. You watch the black silt settle into every ridge and basin. You feel the pulse of life stirring beneath the mud. You remember the day we refused to bow and the day the soldiers laid down their spears. You taste the sweet grain on your tongue as you break bread with family. Years later, you tell your children the story of that day. You speak of how desperation drove you to action and how courage hardened your spirit. You remind them that a community united by hunger and hope can bend the will of rulers. You teach them that fairness and mercy stand above threats and chains. And you remind them that when the gods bless the flood, the land will yield once more to those who labor with grit and unity. You plant a seed this morning and carry a clay jar of grain from the boat. The canal flows free and clear. You feel the strength of our ancestors in every turn of the shovel. You look across the green shoots peeking from the mud and know that our revolt was not only a moment of anger, but the spark of a legacy. We survived by sheer grit and by the bonds that held us together. And now we reap the harvest of our own making. You rise each day before the sun has warmed the earth, drawn from sleep by the whisper of wind through papyrus and the faint light that glints on the Nile's rising tide. From the moment you stand on bare feet pressed against cool clay, you feel the weight of every task ahead. There is no pause for rest, no turning back once you shoulder your wooden hoe and shoulder sack. Your body remembers hours spent bending over furrows, turning black silt by hand to plant kernels of emmer, each grain a fragile promise against the sun's promise of drought. Before the flood, you carve canals in the bone-dry ground, prying apart packed clay with iron blades until water will pour freely into every furrow and basin. You build earthen ridges by packing mud beneath your heels and lining walls with stones set in clay mortar. You level each channel with simple tools so that the river's gift will not rush too fast or stall. Your hands bleed from rope bindings and your back hums with every step. You climb and then descend wooden ramps to set great limestone blocks in place, each slab hauled by ropes and sweat. When the flood comes, you rush into the standing water to plant again, pressing seedlings into warm mud, each sprout a lifeline for families who wait on your labor. You rise again at harvest to swing your sickle beneath a blistering midday sun, cutting golden stalks until your arms go numb and your throat cracks with thirst. You bind sheaves with braided reeds and carry bundles to wooden sleds hauled by oxen. You thresh in circles of dust, beating stalks to free kernels, then winnow by casting grain into the wind until it settles clean and heavy in cloth bowls. Every measure of grain must be stored for lean months. You climb into clay silos to pour in the harvest, sealing trapdoors with plaster and straw so that no rat or snake can steal a single kernel. You deliver tribute to the governor's steward, weighing jars of grain and baskets of oil on pan balances, signing your name in clay to guarantee fair measure. You stand beneath the temple walls to offer a portion of your crop to the gods, pouring beer and scattering bread before the statue of Hapi, ever hopeful the river god will bless another season of life. Then come seasons of famine when the Nile's waters fail. You drain the last of the shallow pools and boil grasses you never meant to eat. You taste grit in every spoonful of thin porridge and beg for barley to be spared from tribute. Locusts descend like dark clouds and strip the fields of every leaf. You stand beneath the sun, hands on your hips, heart pounding as you watch the green vanish. You fight the plague in lean huts filled with fevered bodies, carrying bowls of broth to those too weak to lift their heads. You bury friends in shallow graves marked by a stone and a prayer. In your darkest hour, you find strength in revolt. You gather with your neighbors at the canal's edge, turning clubs once used for threshing into instruments of defiance. You refuse to surrender your last grain or your body to forced labor. You drive away the overseers and stand firm until the governor's agents swear in writing to lower tribute and send seed for planting. You march back to the fields under the sun and see in each other's eyes the resolve born of hunger and hope. Your faith in the river sustains you. You honor Happy each morning with humble offerings of bread and beer at the shrine, pouring water drawn from the canal onto the altar. You chant ancient prayers while incense curls in the dawn air. You dance with sistrums under turquoise skies and place clay lamps at the statue's feet. You trust that the monsoon clouds will gather in distant highlands and flood the Nile once more with life and renewal. Through every trial, you cling to hope. You leave grain in the shaded pit set by your home for next year's seed. You tear off a piece of fresh bread and pass it first to the oldest elder. You pour a cup of beer for the child who brought you water at the start of the day. You rebuild canals and patch basin walls, knowing that each small act of care is an act of resistance against drought and despair. When you collapse into sleep on a thin reed mat, your muscles aching, you taste the weight of days lived wholly in labor and longing. You dream of waterways pulsing with flood, of green shoots rising from the mud, of grain piled high in creamy jars. You dream of laughter around feasts under date palms, of children free from hunger, of a world shaped by your hands and your faith. Would you last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer? Could you rise before dawn, carve the earth, sow the seed, harvest beneath the blazing sun, store the grain, pay tribute, endure famine, fight plague, revolt for justice, and still honor the gods in humble prayer? Only those who bear hunger in their bellies and hope in their hearts could stand in the fields of silt and toil until the river's promise is fulfilled once more.